with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So Howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends with me, Angela Rippon. We've given him the weekend off, so it means that I'm going to be keeping you company here on TV and radio with the stories that really do matter all over the country, and we've got plenty coming up, including the very latest on the rail strikes, the aftermath of the by-election, and an update from Glastonbury, of course. But first, it's the news with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Angela. Good afternoon. It's just past 12 o'clock. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Boris Johnson insists voters want to hear less about what he's calling things he stuffed up as he defended his leadership after a double by-election defeat. Speaking from the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Rwanda this morning, the Prime Minister said the public actually wants to hear more about the big issues.
I have to, listen to all sorts of criticism. That's part of my job as leader. When things are tough, of course, people are going to rightly going to direct their frustration, their irritation at government and at me. I'm the leader of the government. I think to be absolutely clear, in the last few months, people in Tiverton, people in Wakefield just heard far too much about stuff they didn't want to be hearing about, and not enough about what we want to do to take the country forward.
Well, that's Boris Johnson's view. However, Labour's Shadow Secretary of State for Defence, John Healey, told GB News the public wants Mr Johnson to go.
I'd spent a lot of time campaigning in Wakefield, very struck by the level of disgust and discontent as people, I think, have seen through Boris Johnson and have lost confidence in the Conservatives doing the basic job of government now. And so it's our job in opposition until the next election to try and hold them to account and offer some of the plans that would make a difference, including on the cost of living, that we're just not seeing from the government itself.
To the strikes now, and the Rmt Union is refusing to rule out further action this year as a third day of walkouts disrupts transport across the country. Only a fifth of train services are running today as thousands of rail workers protest over jobs, pay and conditions. Many seaside resorts have no services at all, and disruption is expected to continue into Sunday. RMT boss Mick Lynch says rail workers would get a better deal if the government understood the work they actually do.
We're not going to name dates immediately, and we're going to continue working constructively with the companies to try and get a deal. But that is a really steep challenge at the moment, and it hurts our people because they've lost their wages. We don't want that to happen. So if Grant Shapps wants to be constructive, that's what he can do. It's up to him what his disposition is. I'll work with Grant Shapps or anyone else that's got something constructive to say in this dispute.
Moving abroad, and a shooting at a nightclub in Norway's capital is being investigated as an act of terrorism. 2 people are dead and 14 seriously injured in the incident in Oslo. Police say one suspect, a 42-year-old Norwegian citizen of Iranian origin, is in custody. He was arrested with 2 weapons, including a fully automatic gun. The shooting took place just hours before Oslo was due to hold its annual Pride Parade. That's now been cancelled. Boris Johnson says the economic consequences of Russia's war could force Ukraine to agree a peace deal that's not in its best interests. His comments come as the UK Ministry of Defence said Russian armoured units continue to make creeping gains in Severodonetsk. Intelligence chiefs believe that President Putin has replaced several generals since the start of the war, including the commander of the airborne forces and the army general. And finally, Sir Paul McCartney will make history later when he becomes Glastonbury Festival's oldest solo headliner. The former Beatle will take to the stage exactly 1 week after celebrating his 80th birthday. His set is expected to attract an especially large crowd with hits from throughout his career. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Angela Rippon.
Thanks very well. A week that has been off the rails, quite literally, is what we've just experienced. Your commute to the office this week may have been different or even cancelled altogether. And today, your plans to get the train to your weekend adventures may well have to be postponed as thousands of staff members at 13 train operators walk out on a number of planned strikes over pay and job cuts. Well, today is the third and final day of the walkout, but the RMT says that the strikes are going to go on for as long as they need, and they've even threatened more walkouts over the summer. So why are they striking? Well, the union says that an offer of a 2% rise in pay with the potential of a further 1% is just unacceptable. The figure they're asking for is closer to 9%. So talks to avert the industrial action collapsed this week as the two sides traded a battle of words and no negotiation was achieved. Plus, calls for the government to get involved in the negotiations were labelled as just a stunt by the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps. But the strikes are not just with the rail industry. We've got hundreds of British Airways workers at Heathrow Airport saying that they voted to go out on strike over pay, and they're threatening to disrupt summer holidays. Unite and GMB union members backed the industrial action on Thursday, with a total of 700 workers set to strike during the school holidays, when demand for a getaway is obviously at an all-time high. Well, the unions announced the action was due to a 10% pay cut that was introduced during the pandemic not being reinstated. You've got all of that, plus the largest education union, which has threatened a ballot to walk out as the National Education Union calls on the Education Secretary for an inflation plus pay rise. So we've got not just rail workers, we've got teachers, doctors, nurses, civil servants, local government, rubbish collectors, librarians, care workers, barristers, and even parking wardens, though frankly I don't think anyone's going to worry about them being out on strike. But with passengers facing yet another day of disruptions today, and with the summer looking likely to be full of discontent, we've invited a whole wealth of guests to come on and try and unpick it all. Now, the presenter may have changed today, but one thing stays the same, and that is that GB News is all about your and our audience. So at GB Views, at gbnews.uk, that's where you have to get in touch with us if you've got any comments that you may have on the stories that we're going to be covering today. We're also, of course, as you will know, on Twitter and Facebook, so I look forward to hearing from you. Well, firstly, I'm delighted to say I've been joined in the studio this lunchtime with the political commentator Patrick O'Flynn. But Patrick, before we actually get there, I just have to say, I mean, what a political weekend this is. We've got the Labour Party obviously celebrating after Wakefield. We've got the Liberal Dems celebrating after their success in the West Country. You've got now grandees and senior Tories saying that Boris has got to go. Boris out there in Rwanda saying, I'm not going anywhere, I'm sticking it out. On Monday, when the House reconvenes, the atmosphere is going to be crackling, isn't it?
It will be the proverbial febrile atmosphere, certainly, Angela. I mean, Boris, they say when the cat's away, the mice will play. He's, out of the country on, important global matters. I think, a lot of the Tory MPs who want him gone probably rue the day they pushed the button on the ballot on the 6th of June. Too early. Yes. And if they'd waited for these by-election results, I think Boris Johnson would be in even more imminent trouble. That there's almost now a proxy battle has emerged with the executive positions on this ruling 1922 committee of the backbenchers being up for grabs, and the elections for those now boil down to pro and anti-Boris factions, and if the antis kind of block out the executive, that gives them leverage to change the rule. And the rule at the moment is Boris can't face another removal by a confidence vote until June the 6th next year. That could be changed, and it could also be changed just given, as you say, the intervention of senior figures such as Michael Howard. But
he's out of the country at the moment and can't do anything to stop this, can he?
Exactly,
So
which reminds us of other Tory leaders who were out of the country in opportune times.
As we remember Margaret Thatcher famously, of course, don't we? Yes. Now, let's get back to the rail strike, because that's what I'd like to talk to you about, because, we're in the third day, and deep joy, we hear that the rail unions have said that they're going to be targeting their strikes probably towards the end of July, right when they can hit school holidays, when they can hit the Commonwealth Games. And in addition, you've got all these other people that are threatening to go on strike as well. I mean, what on earth is actually happening at the moment in terms of industrial relations in our government?
Well, people will get very, very angry that the strikes always seem to be aimed at causing maximum disruption and think that that's unpleasant. But if you think about it from the trade union point of view, there is no point in them going on strike at a time when no one will notice. The whole point of a strike is for them to show how much disruption they can cause, which will kind of monetize the leverage they've got and result in higher pay. So they're always going to go on strike. And we've seen this over the years.
And target specifically
and school holidays always seems to get it in the neck. And it looks like, from a multiplicity of sources, that's happening again this year. And we have the government trying to kind of bring back the worries of the days of Arthur Scargill, which, is fine.
Arthur's there. Arthur's been on the picket line.
He's any picket line and he'll show up for old time's sake. But I really think what the public wants the government to do is not to try and blame everyone else, but to come up with a plan to stop the strikes.
Yeah, but can Grant Shapps get involved? Because, this is what Mick Lynch is asking for, isn't it? The union says this is what he should be doing. Can the government get involved when basically this is an argument between the employers and the union?
Well, the government certainly can get involved. If Boris Johnson is in one of his wonky shopping trolley modes, Mick Lynch might assume that he's always like that. If you put him under enough pressure, Mick Lynch is hoping to drag Grant Shapps in under political pressure to cut them a better deal, right? Now, that's one possible way there could be that outcome, but then it would have knock-on effects encouraging other militant unions to try their luck, and that wouldn't be great. The other thing the government can do is come up with a plan to, quote, break the strike, and that is by identifying agency workers who can come in to replace the strikers on the day they're not working.
Which is what they are planning, isn't it?
Well, and that will be very controversial. But, in the old days, under Maggie Thatcher, you would have known what she would do. I think the problem with Boris Johnson is what he believes depends perhaps on who he was talking to most recently.
Let me just say, there are so many strikes now being lined up to take us through, and we'll be talking about some of them later in the programme. Is this coincidence, or or is this actually politically motivated? I was looking at something which said that, and we're going to talk about this later on, that we had the voting was strategically organised on an industrial scale. Have we now got striking on an industrial scale being politically motivated?
I think it's undoubtedly true. If you look across the trade union movement, you won't find a single trade union leader who's not pretty left-wing, very, very anti-Tory. So there's always, you know, a sort of sideline of delight in causing trouble for a Tory government. However, you know, let's be honest, the thing that's causing the members to vote to go on strike is near 10% inflation, which is making everyone feel poorer. That's got to be the number one motivating factor. I actually think the autumn is more tricky than the summer. If the education union and the health sector unions start striking in the autumn, that will cause even more serious disruption.
Yeah, very, very briefly. I mean, what do you see as the outcome, and what do you see as a way out of the situation we're in at the moment?
I would like to see the government take a tough line, because I think if we start giving high pay rises, high expectations of inflation get locked in, that causes economic problems. But I think what's more likely to happen is a messy compromise, that we will have another round of rail strikes. The union leader, Mick Lynch, is quite an adept public performer. They probably think they've come out of the PR battle quite well. So there'll be another round, and I think in the end they'll get a slightly higher pay rise than was on the agenda at the moment.
Patrick, stay with me, will you please? Because I'd like to come back to you after we've spoken to some of our other guests this morning. But that there was Patrick, who, as I say, he's from the Daily Express, aren't you?
Long-term Daily Express. I write for a lot of outlets.
Of others as well. Well, joining me now is John McTernan, who is a political strategist, and he's former director of political operations to Tony Blair. Now, are you with me? Yes, indeed, you are. John, let me just ask you, you're a political strategist. What is the strategy of always, I mean, Patrick's just sort of touched on it, but why do the unions always have to put all this pain on the public when in fact the argument is between the unions and the employers and the employees, especially when I think at the moment the train strike has not quite had the effect that it might have done 5 or 10 years ago, when so many people are used to working from home anyway?
The main point is that a strike is a sign of failure. It's a failure of the employers and the employees to keep on talking, to find a deal. In the end, in all the disputes that there will be a deal, because that's how strikes end. And the issue is, why are people wanting to go on strike? No one wants to take a 10% pay cut. And that's what the cost of living crisis means. When inflation gets 10, 11%, unless your pay matches that, you take a pay cut of 10 to 11%. And that would be after a period when, for most workers, particularly in the public sector, wages have been falling behind anyway because of low pay settlements. So it's very straightforward to understand why the strike's happening. And the reason why chaos is caused, or the desire for chaos, the desire for disruption is caused, is that's the way the strike gets some impact, gets some public discussion, gets some coverage, gets on the agenda, and that forces the employers back to the table. But no union wants to go on strike. It's the act of last resort.
And I mean, it does seem that the Labour Party itself is rather confused at the moment about where it stands on it, because you've got Starmer saying that he didn't want the strike to go ahead, Rayner saying that she would like to be out there striking with them. Indeed, there were a number of Labour MPs on the picket lines actually defying what Starmer had said, which was not to get involved. Do Labour themselves really know where they stand on this issue?
Yeah, Labour are pretty clear on this. A Labour Party that aspires to be a government for the whole country, for the employers as well as the employees, for business as well as unions. And so Labour has never, when in government, taken sides in strikes, and Labour has never, when aspiring to be in government, taken sides in strikes. And it's unfortunate lasting effect of Corbyn and Corbyn's leadership that some MPs believe that the Labour Party is a your strike is my strike party. We're not. We're the Labour Party. We're not the picket party. We're not the strike party. We're the Labour Party. And to be a national government, you don't pick sides. So I think Keir's in the right place on this. Other people are being self-indulgent when they should be self-disciplined.
I mean, at the moment, we've got the union saying that they want something like 9% as an increase. We've got the government saying, or the employers saying you can probably have 3%. There's such a huge gap between them, and both sides are digging their heels in. Patrick has already said there's obviously going to have to be a compromise here. How do you see this coming to an end, if at all, in the near future?
There's plenty of room in the rail industry, if we're talking about the specific dispute there's plenty of room in the rail industry for productivity gains. And that's where the gap between the 3 and the 10 will be found. It'll be by the unions making concessions on staffing, on productivity, on working practices, which they will do because that's inevitably the way the dispute will be settled, and by the employers increasing their offer, but they will not increase the offer until the unions accept some basic rules of the game around there being changes to working practices. Now, look, the railway industry may well never recover. Privatisation was a huge success. It doubled the number of people on the railways, but numbers are down. There was the 80%, 90% of the numbers that were pre-pandemic. If those travelers don't come back, if those journeys don't come back, then there'll be 10 to 20% less revenue on the railways, so there needs to be 10 to 20% lower cost. If the industry is surviving, we need rail to perform a major part of decarbonising the climate change. Then rail is in the end direct communication.
John, we're having terrible troubles with your line at the moment, and I'm afraid I know what you're saying is probably terribly important now, and it's impossible even to lip read what you're saying. So sorry about that, but thank you very much indeed for the points that you were making. I mean, quite an interesting point there. He was saying that the railways may never ever actually recover from any of this, Patrick.
Well, I think he's right that they might not get back to what they were pre-pandemic, and perhaps the era of the mass season ticket holder with everyone going in at peak time and coming home at peak time, that does seem to be one thing that's changed post-pandemic. I mean, hopefully we'll get a lot of our way of life fully back after the pandemic, and you don't see very many people walking around everywhere with masks anymore, for instance. But that kind of rigid peak time season ticket rail travel perhaps is going to be more spread out during the day. And I think John is right that the overall sort of expectations of passenger numbers and revenue is going to be quite a bit less. So working practices have to be modernised and productivity has to be improved.
I've got the very person who's going to be able to answer that now, because he's my next guest, and it's Andy Bagnall, who's the Chief Executive of the Rail Partners, which represents railway-owning groups and freight companies, and it is indeed the new trade body for the industry. Andy, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I wonder if you can just put something straight for me at the moment, because I'm not too sure about where you stand on redundancies. Now, as I understand it, the rail companies have all said that there will be negotiated redundancies, but the union is saying that they think that there are going to be redundancies made whether people want to be made redundant or not. Where actually do you stand in negotiations on this point?
Well, look, the first thing to say is that the train companies that I speak for want to give their people a pay rise, but a pay rise has to be affordable. There's only two sources of income for the railway. That's from fare payers and from taxpayers. We can't raise fares at a time that we're trying to attract people back to rail. You've already heard John McTernan there talking about the impact on passenger numbers of the pandemic. We're still at only about sort of 80% of revenue. So we need to attract people back, and putting up fares is not the way to do that. Equally, we can't just ask for further tax subsidy. The government has stood behind the railway during the pandemic to the tune of some £16 billion. And as we emerge from the virus, we can't take more than our fair share of the taxpayers. So the only way in which to make a pay deal affordable is through reform. And that means changing the way we do things. It's that will deliver savings, and then those savings could be used to fund pay rises, but also reduce taxpayer subsidy and hold fares down.
Andy, I'm going to stop you for a second. Andy, if you can hear me, I'm going to stop you for a second because you didn't answer my question. I'm going to come to you. I'm going to come about the reforms in a minute. Are there going to be compulsory redundancies, or will they be negotiated?
No, well, look, let me answer that directly. It is too early to say at this point exactly what will happen in terms of the reforms. What I was trying to set out is that the key to unlocking the savings that will fund a pay deal is changing the way we do things. We need to negotiate those changes with the trade unions. That's what unlocks the savings for a pay deal. And then when you understand the scale of those reforms, the changes that need to be made, you can work through, can you do that in a way that you can rule out compulsory redundancies, do it through voluntary redundancy, through reskilling of people, retraining so that they can do other jobs. Or in some circumstances, unfortunately, there may have to be compulsory redundancies. But the important point is to work through that in negotiation, and then it may be possible that the train companies can make that offer to the trade unions.
But you can't actually rule it out completely that there will not be compulsory.
No, that's right. Not at the start of the conversation. You've got to work that through.
Let's talk about the reforms then. Let's talk about the reforms very briefly, about the Spanish practices that you're making a great deal about at the moment. I know a bit about this, of course, because my own industry and newspapers went through all of this when we had to change from linotype operators to computers. Just give me some idea of the sort of Spanish practices that you want to get rid of, that are the reforms you require to drag the railways into the 21st century.
Well, exactly as you say, we do need to bring the railway up to date in a number of areas, and train companies would urge the trade unions to work with them on doing exactly that. A good example of the reform that's needed is the so-called 7-day railway. We need to adapt to serve increased demand for Sunday services. As we're coming out of the pandemic, demand is recovering, but it's recovering in different patterns to before. One of the areas that's actually recovering very strongly is leisure travel. So people do want to travel on Saturdays and Sundays. But right now, many train company staff only work on Sundays on the basis of voluntary overtime rather than it being part of the normal working week. And that's both expensive, but it also creates unreliability into the system. So a better way of doing it would be to resource Sundays in a more business as usual way, rostering staff as you would for other days of the week. And the outcome of that would be less disruption on Sundays, so a better customer experience, but also a more productive way of organising the railway that would, as I said, sort of unlock savings that may then in turn fund the pay claims that the trade unions are seeking.
Andy Bagnall, thank you for that. I mean, and I know there are many other so-called Spanish practices on your list that you want to get sorted out as well, but sadly we don't have time to go through all of them. But thank you very much indeed. Andy Bagnall there, Chief Executive of the Rail Partners, which represents railway-owning groups and freight companies, and as we said, is the new trade body for the industry. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends with me, Angela Rippon, and we've got lots more still to come. A biennial gathering of member states to discuss global and Commonwealth issues concludes today in the Rwandan capital, Kigali, with the second day of the main high-level meetings of heads following yesterday's official opening. We're going to be crossing live to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, next. But first, let's take a look at the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK will be unsettled as low pressure continues to dominate the weather pattern for many of us. Let's get you the details. A breezy afternoon to come across southwest England. There'll be a mixture of sunny spells and scattered heavy showers, feeling cooler than recent days with highs of 16 Celsius. Plenty of sunny spells expected across southeast England and the London area. A few showers are possible, perhaps the odd heavy one developing too. Blustery conditions are expected across Wales, with some heavy showers moving through. Gusts of 30 to 35 miles per hour are also possible towards the coast. Sunny spells and showers for northwest England. Some of the showers will be on the heavy side, but will move through quickly on the brisk wind. Highs of 19 Celsius, so feeling rather fresher. Further showers are likely across northeast England through Saturday afternoon, though they won't be as heavy as they were on Friday. Spells of sunshine will lift temperatures to around 20 Celsius. Plenty of sunny spells across Scotland, but also the risk of some showers. Winds will continue to increase across western parts of the country, highs reaching around 18 or 19 Celsius. An unseasonably windy afternoon for Northern Ireland, with gales developing around the coasts. Sunshine and showers for many and feeling cool for this time of year, highs of 17. Staying unsettled into the evening for many, with blustery showers most frequently across the west of the UK, and that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
we're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, and the left fights the right, and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was, in fact, a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It's 12, and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News. No, Alastair hasn't changed his voice. It's me, Angela Ribbon, sitting in for him while he has the weekend off. Now, today marks the final day of the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Rwanda, where the Prime Minister and the Prince of Wales have been holding talks. Now, while Boris Johnson is there, he faces growing pressure over his job just before he gets off to Germany later today for the G7 summit. Well, our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, has been in Rwanda this week, watching things unfold. Darren, the head of the Commonwealth, have been there to discuss Commonwealth issues, but I guess the journalists have been buzzing with what's been going on politically here at home.
Yeah, indeed, Angela. You're right in saying the Prime Minister has been spending an awful lot of time on Commonwealth issues. In fact, he is currently just outside Kigali, along with the 53 other leaders of the Commonwealth, having a meeting, a retreat, effectively, where issues like Ukraine and food security are very much high up on the agenda. But, frankly, and let's be honest about this, yes, lots of the conversations here in Kigali, certainly amongst the travelling press, has been about his job in many regards, about whether he's going to be able to sustain his position as Conservative leader, given those two by-election defeats in Wakefield and in Tiverton, and that cabinet resignation yesterday. We've seen the Prime Minister this morning for about 30 minutes. Us journalists, he insisted that he didn't think that people wanted to hear about the things he put that he'd stuffed up, but rather that he wanted to focus on the kind of issues that he reckons people are really concerned about, like the cost of living crisis, rising cost of fuel and so on. But in the end, you're right, this is all pretty tricky for the Prime Minister. Clearly politics is very difficult back home, and he's a long, long way away, and he's not due home, Angela, for quite a while, almost a week.
I know that journalists are among the biggest gossips in the world. So what is the gossip that's doing the rounds there at the moment about where he stands and what's likely to happen when he gets back?
Well, this is the big question. It's really quite unknown. Of course, Downing Street are pretty uneasy about all of this. I have to say, the Prime Minister was in the swimming pool yesterday morning when he found out about Oliver Dowden's resignation, or had to get out to answer the phone call to receive that resignation. So there is clearly concern that MPs could be plotting, that cabinet ministers might be on the verge of resignation, essentially when the cat's away, the mice might play. And that is quite difficult. So the Prime Minister is going to travel straight from here, Angela, to the G7 in Munich and then on to a NATO summit in Madrid. He would like to say that he's trying to deal with the big global issues of the moment, not least of all that war in Ukraine. Does not want to see Ukraine necessarily make any concessions, fears that some countries may be piling pressure on President Zelensky to do so. But frankly, you're right, he's under an awful lot of pressure himself and his position. And there is a sense that yesterday was a very, very difficult day for the Conservative Party. This sense that they had lost the seat to Labour, lost the seat to the Liberal Democrats, almost this pincer movement, and that Boris Johnson was a drag on the Conservatives' hope of trying to win the next general election. But in the end, he says he's not going to go anywhere, and that essentially you kind of have to drag him out of Downing Street. But Conservative MPs might have a different plan. We'll have to wait and see.
Indeed we will, and I'm sure we haven't got long to wait either. That was our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, in the Rwandan capital, Kigali, who is covering the last day of the Commonwealth meeting for us. Now, you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends with me, Angela Rippon. There's plenty more still to come this afternoon, including after not one but two defeats in Thursday's by-elections. Do the results mean the beginning of the end for Boris Johnson's premiership? We're going to be discussing that next. But first, let's get the news with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Angela. It's 12:33. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister insists voters want to hear less about what he's calling things he stuffed up as he defended his leadership after a double by-election defeat. Speaking from the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Rwanda this morning, Boris Johnson said the public wants to hear more about the big issues.
Have to, listen to all sorts of criticism. That's part of my job as leader. When things are tough, of course, people are going to rightly going to direct their frustration, their irritation at government and at me. I'm the leader of the government. I think to be absolutely clear, in the last few months, people in Tiverton, people in Wakefield just heard far too much about stuff they didn't want to be hearing about, and not enough about what we want to do to take the country forward.
The Rmt Union is refusing to rule out further strike action this year as a third day of walkouts disrupts transport across the country. Only a fifth of train services are running today as thousands of rail workers protest over jobs, pay and conditions. 2 people have been killed in a shooting at a nightclub in Norway's capital. 14 people were also seriously injured in the incident, which police are treating as an act of terrorism. Officers say one suspect, a 42-year-old Norwegian citizen of Iranian origin, is in custody. The shooting took place just hours before Oslo was due to hold its annual Pride Parade. That's now been cancelled. Sir Paul McCartney will make history later when he becomes Glastonbury's oldest solo headliner. The former Beatle will take to the stage exactly 1 week after celebrating his 80th birthday. His set's expected to attract an especially large crowd with heats from throughout his career. On TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now let's get back to Angela.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
we're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's, what time is it? Oh, it's 12:37. Time flying when you're having fun, which I am. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends on GB News, but for today and tomorrow, with me, Angela Rippon. Now, you've been getting in touch on our big topic of the day already, and that's the rail strikes and potential ongoing strike action. We've got an email from Jay who says, I don't understand why so many people are against this. If the richest shared the wealth more evenly, there wouldn't be a need for strikes and everybody would have a pay rise without inflation. While Billy says, I think if a public service is going to be striking which affects everyone, the public should have a say before they strike. Well, I suppose strike members are members of the public, aren't they? But do keep your views coming in. And please do subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're at GB News. Nice and easy to find. Now, a triple blow for the Prime Minister just a matter of weeks after he survived a confidence vote in his leadership. The Conservatives losing not one, but two by-elections, and the Tory party chair, Oliver Dowden, resigning from his role. Now, the traditional red wall seat of Wakefield, which the Conservatives won at the 2019 election, is now back in the hands of the Labour Party. Simon Lightwood defeated Tory candidate Nadeem Ahmed by 4,925 votes in the poll to overturn a majority of 3,358. The turnout there was 39.9%. Well, minutes after that declaration was made in Wakefield, the Liberal Democrats took Tiverton and Honiton in Devon from the Conservatives, overturning a majority of more than 24,000. The new Liberal Democrat MP Richard Ford, who's a former army major, said it had sent a loud and clear message to the government. Well, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson's majority in the House of Commons has now been reduced to 68 seats after both defeats. Conservative Party Chairman Oliver Dowden handed in his resignation letter. Now, Dowden has been a major and a long-standing supporter of the Prime Minister, but in his letter he wrote, our supporters are distressed and disappointed by recent events, and I share their feelings. We cannot carry on with business as usual. Somebody must take responsibility, and I have concluded that in these circumstances, it would not be right for me to remain in office. Well, joining me now to discuss all of this is a former Conservative MP for South Derbyshire, and that's Edwina Currie. Edwina, welcome. Thank you for joining me here on the programme. Let me just quote a couple of things to you, because we've got Keir Starmer saying that the Wakefield win was the birthplace of a new Labour government. Ed Davey is warning that the Liberals are coming. And Rory Stewart, a former Conservative MP, says this is the beginning of the end for Boris. Are they over-enthusiastic and a bit premature, do you think, in those statements?
Well, hi, Angela. It's lovely to see you. And if I may say so, you're looking absolutely terrific. We're a great generation, aren't we?
Not bad.
They're whistling in the wind, all the people that you've quoted. I mean, if your memory is long enough and you go back to Margaret Thatcher's day, in her first parliament, they lost 4 by-elections. And we went on then to win a huge general election result, a landslide, in which I was elected. In that first parliament that I was in, Margaret's second, they lost 5 by-elections. And in 1985, everyone was saying, oh, gosh, she's finished. And that didn't turn out to be right either, because we went on to win the next general election with a big majority. And in the parliament after that, when we actually changed over from Margaret to John Major, the government lost 7 by-elections, and the Conservatives still went on to win the next election. So there is nothing whatever to read into this, except it's a mid-term, and people have quite genuine reasons. I'm totally with them on this, for feeling somewhat disgruntled. One of the reasons is that the people who caused the by-election, the former MPs, have had to leave in considerable disgrace. The two Tory MPs, two blokes who turned out to be real duds, one with a criminal record now for a really heinous crime against a child, and he's in jail right now, right place for him. And the other, Neil Parish, who didn't realise that watching porn in the House of Commons is not a good idea, not least because it will alienate all your colleagues who are watching you watch porn, and it will alienate about 52% of your electorate, and that's the women.
But it's not only, but if I can just interrupt you, Edwina, it isn't only just the failings of those two local MPs. Boris Johnson himself clearly has something to answer for as far as many of these voters are concerned. That's what we're being told. He is out of the country now for the next 8 days. And you mentioned Margaret Thatcher. She was out of the country when she finally had to go. He's not here to defend himself, but do you think he cares one way or the other? Does he not mind? Is he not bothered when he says, I'm going to stay here? It's because egotistically he believes, yes, I jolly well am going to stay here.
Well, I was amused at the thought that Boris was actually going off to other countries where he was being made very welcome, going to Kyiv, places like that. Margaret did that a little bit as the Berlin Wall came down, and her reaction to everything was, well, they love me here. Actually, the fight and the issues that you're going to be fighting the general election on are very seldom foreign affairs. You really have to be looking after people at home. And you put your finger on the main issue, I think, that concerns people is the cost of living crisis. Where I think the government really needs to pull its socks up is in explaining much better that it's not just down to one government. This is something that's affecting much of the rest of the world. Inflation and the rise of prices and the bills that are facing everybody, particularly fuel, are happening in many other parts of the world, and other countries are facing exactly the same issues. Our government has announced that it's taking action. I think it's not actually hit people's pockets yet. The time of the by-elections has come between the announcement and the money actually going into people's bank accounts. They will see a difference from July onwards. But nonetheless, I think those are the issues that matter. The real voters, in the by-elections, particularly in Wakefield, were the ones who stayed at home. As you mentioned, the turnout in Wakefield was a pathetic 39%. And even in Tivy, something like 17,000 voters in Tiverton and Honiton, who normally go to the polls, said, well, we're not happy about supporting the government right now. We think they need a kick. But we're certainly not going to support Labour, who came third and lost their deposit. And we're not going to support the Lib Dems either, because we think they're a bunch of idiots. So basically, there is no good news in that for either Labour or the Lib Dems, particularly Lib Dems.
You tell it as it is, Edwina. You always do, and you just have. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you. Edwina Currie there, former Conservative MP for South Derbyshire. She does not mince her words, does that lady? But to discuss this further now, joining me is Joe Phillips, who's a political commentator and indeed a former press secretary to the former Lib Dem leader, Paddy Ashdown. Welcome to the programme. As you will know, this is the third time you've won a by-election, in just over 12 months, and clearly the party is absolutely thrilled by it. But what do you think this really means for the future of the party within the House of Commons?
Well, I think what it shows is that people are getting much more savvy about tactical voting, and that's clear in both the by-elections this week, that Lib Dem voters gave their votes, lent their voters to Labour in Wakefield, and the reverse was true in Devon. So I think people have got much more aligned to the idea that they can use their votes. Whether or not that translates into general election terms remains to be seen. But clearly this is a fantastic result for the Liberal Democrats. It's a 30% swing, and I think it's something like the biggest by-election victory in history, actually. And I mean, you and I, Angela, as Edwina was saying, we've seen these stunning victories at by-elections elections over the years that don't always translate into the seats being kept at a general election. But it will have been a boost, a huge boost to Ed Davey and his party. And as you say, 3 by-election victories, and all of them safe Tory seats. Now, if this was to be replicated, if you say 24,000, it's absolutely impossible. You could lose 6 cabinet ministers with majorities that are under 10,000. So the Tories do need to be worried. And I think what is interesting is that both Wakefield and Devon, they were both Brexit supporting seats. Now, the Lib Dems make absolutely no secret of the fact that they are Remainers. They were not pro-Brexit, but these are Brexit supporting seats who have given their votes to Labour and to the Liberal Democrats. And I think the issues, and Edwina Currie is right, it is about the cost of living. But if you look at Tiverton and Honiton, a very rural constituency facing huge problems in agriculture, second homes, public transport, cost of living, a lack of labour for the tourism and agricultural industries. So there are lots of big issues. And I think much as there will be many people like Edwina Currie trying to put a spin on it, it's a midterm defeat, governments are always unpopular halfway through. The truth of the matter is that this is actually about Boris Johnson, and it really now is beholden on the Tory party, and particularly the men and women in suits in the cabinet, to say to him, as they did to Margaret Thatcher, the time's up, the game's up. And the interviews that we've seen and heard of him in Kigali this morning, I think the public are sick and tired of seeing and listening to somebody who sounds like a recalcitrant teenager being told off time and time again by their teacher or one of their parents. The game is up, and for him it has always been nothing more than a game.
I mean, do you feel then that after we've seen the resignation of Oliver Dowden, that in fact this will be followed by other cabinet ministers? And I do have to remind you, I mean, yes, it is the West Country win was wonderful for the Lib Dems, but of course in Wakefield the Lib Dems candidate actually lost her deposit. So I mean, it wasn't overall; it was really tactical voting that got you where you are, isn't it?
Oh, no, that's exactly what I'm saying. And Labour lost their deposit in Devon. Yeah, absolutely. And that shows that the public are getting much more used to it. If they want to get rid or they want to send a message, I think the tribal politics of long ago have now gone, and people are much more promiscuous with their voting. You can see that in local elections all the time. But to go back to your point, Andrew, about Oliver Dowden, I mean, that was the stunning news at 5:25 yesterday morning. And I can't really get the picture that Darren was talking about the Prime Minister having to be taken out of the swimming pool to take the phone call. It's too unpleasant. But I think, that will have sent shockwaves through the Cabinet, and it may well have given other members in the Cabinet, and certainly junior ministers, the confidence now to say, actually, he's not going to win elections for us. This is a disaster. This is rippling through. And also, let's be honest, a lot of them will be looking at their own seats, their own careers. Are they going to be safe? Not necessarily.
Very briefly, Jo, do you feel that while Boris Johnson may actually manage to survive and ensure that he stays in place, will he do that by sacrificing the future of the party itself? So he will still be there, but just by being there, he's actually doing damage to the Conservative Party and government.
Oh, absolutely. And I think there are many, many decent Conservatives out there working in constituencies around the country who must be absolutely heartbroken. The Tory party has got a proud tradition. Boris Johnson's trashing that along with Parliament, along with our democracy and everything else he touches.
So you do feel that there are going to be more resignations, and clearly you do want Boris Johnson to go. But is this the right time to have a leadership election? You mentioned yourself that people are worried about the cost of living. We are in the middle of a major economic crisis, as well as everything else that is going on in the country at the moment. Should we be jumping ship and diverting our attention to the government finding a new leader?
Well, should we be carrying on with a leader who clearly hasn't got a plan on how to deal with the cost of living crisis? That's the counter argument to that. They probably should have waited. The 1922 committee probably should have waited until after these by-elections instead of having the vote on the 6th of June. They've now got elections on the 21st of July, so in a month's time. Now, it may well be that they get new members on that committee who are willing to change the rules that would get rid of this current situation where you can't have a leadership challenge within 12 months. Now, that remains to be seen. I think people are so fed up. And much as Boris Johnson would like to say people are fed up of hearing about Partygate, they're actually fed up with the lying, the broken promises. I mean, you know, everything he does is about, and his government is about getting headlines, but nothing is followed through. And I think, you know, OK, you have a summer of a leadership challenge. The problem, of course, for the Conservative Party is that there's no obvious candidate. And it may be that they have to go with a sort of a safe pair of hands, somebody like Jeremy Hunt or somebody like Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, who's widely respected, or Penny Mordaunt, former Defence Minister, again, as a sort of, a possibility. But there's clearly not, on current performance, going to win an election with Boris Johnson at the helm. So they either need to bite the bullet and do it now, because there's never a good time. There's never a good time to choose a new leader. But the damage that he's inflicting on the party is too great.
Thank you very much indeed, Joe, for that. Joe Phillips, political commentator and former Press Secretary to Paddy Ashdown, with some very pungent comments there about the situation affecting Boris Johnson at the moment. Now, in case you missed it, today is Armed Forces Day. It's a chance to recognise and indeed pay tribute to Britain's serving men and women, veterans and their families. More than 150 events are taking place right across the country today, including the national celebration in Scarborough. Now, earlier in the week, though, one community in Nottinghamshire cheered on troops that were based locally at a very special ceremony, and our East Midlands reporter, Will Hollis, was there.
Each step through Eastwood and the crowd calls out louder. The town's support for the British Army shown through strength in numbers. The parading troops, 170 Infrastructure Support Engineer Group, live here too, at nearby Chetwynd Barracks. The group's members served in Afghanistan and are serving elsewhere right now. Colonel Hatcher is its commander.
6-2, 6-3, 6-6 Works Group, alongside the group's headquarters and support squadron, are on parade here today, representing the 200 or so officers and soldiers who are currently deployed both in the UK and overseas in support of training operations and other defence activity.
In 2009, the troops were granted freedom of entry into Broxtowe Borough, a medieval tradition of trust and a huge civic honour, the perfect reason to parade during Armed Forces Week.
I'm so proud of them because we don't get the opportunity to connect with the public and where we live very frequently, so it's great to be able to do this. We did a parade a couple of weeks ago in Derby for the Queen's Jubilee, and then to do this in the middle of Armed Forces Week, it's been absolutely perfect.
Armed Forces Day and the wider week means that communities can celebrate the serving men, women and veterans that form the British Army, Navy and Air Force. But it's about their families too. Back in Eastwood, Sabina arrived early before the pavement packed out.
My husband and I have been together for 19 years, married for 15, and this is the very first time I'm ever going to see him march. So just trying to contain myself because I'm a little bit excited.
Well, it means everything, doesn't it, to see our soldiers. We don't see a lot of them in Eastwood, and I've got 3 sons and none of them are in uniform, and I desperately wanted them to be.
Broxtowe's MP Darren Henry served in the Air Force.
When you're serving, you're very aware that you're there to do your duty for your country, and 170 Engineer Group came back from Afghanistan last year, for example, so we're very proud of that. But what's important about a day like today is that you express your connectivity with the community.
For Councillor Ridgelovic, leading his community means keeping it connected to the forces that share these streets.
They are able, therefore, to come out, show their support for the armed forces, for the job that they do in protecting our freedom, our culture and our heritage. We are immensely proud.
The war in Ukraine has shown Britain's armed forces still have strong ties internationally, but on Armed Forces Day, the connection isn't lost locally either. Will Hollis for GB News in the East Midlands.
Nice report there from Will Hollins. Thanks very much indeed. Now, you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends with me, Angela Rippon. We've got lots more coming up on the show this afternoon, including how are the rail strikes affecting the hospitality industry and London's weekend tourism? Do stay with us. Still a lot to get through, but right now it's the weather forecast.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK will be unsettled as low pressure continues to dominate the weather pattern for many of us. Let's get you the details. A breezy afternoon to come across southwest England. There'll be a mixture of sunny spells and scattered heavy showers, feeling cooler than recent days with highs of 16 Celsius. Plenty of sunny spells expected across southeast England and the London area. A few showers are possible, perhaps the odd heavy one developing too. Blustery conditions are expected across Wales with some heavy showers moving through. Gusts of 30 to 35 miles per hour are also possible towards the coast. Sunny spells and showers for northwest England. Some of the showers will be on the heavy side but will move through quickly on the brisk wind. Highs of 19 Celsius, so feeling rather fresher. Further showers are likely across northeast England through Saturday afternoon, though they won't be as heavy as they were on Friday. Spells of sunshine will lift temperatures to around 20 Celsius. Plenty of sunny spells across Scotland, but also the risk of some showers. Winds will continue to increase across western parts of the country, highs reaching around 18 or 19 Celsius. An unseasonably windy afternoon for Northern Ireland with gales developing around the coast. Sunshine and showers for many and feeling cool for this time of year, highs of 17. Staying unsettled into the evening for many with blustery showers most frequently across the west of the UK, and that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
we're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you. And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, and the left fights the right, and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was, in fact, a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome if you've just joined us. This is, it's exactly 1 o'clock, isn't it? Yes, and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends with me, Angela Rippon. And if you're wondering where on earth Alastair is, I can tell you he's going to be at Hyde Park at the Rolling Stones concert this afternoon and this evening, which is why you've got me instead of him, but he's having the weekend off. But we are now into the last hour of the programme, and I'm going to be keeping you company here on television and radio with, as I say, plenty more to come, including more on our top discussion on those strikes that look as if they're going to be affecting all of us over the summer break right through into the autumn. Because in this hour, we're going to look at how this is impacting businesses and the economy, plus how does this affect us mentally? All of that is to come. But first, let's get the latest news with Ray Addison.
Good afternoon. It's just after 1 o'clock. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. Boris Johnson has claimed voters want to hear less about what he's calling things he stuffed up as he defended his leadership after a double by-election defeat. Speaking from the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Rwanda, the Prime Minister said the public actually wants to hear more about the big issues.
I have to, listen to all sorts of criticism. That's part of my job as leader. When things are tough, of course, people are going to rightly going to direct their frustration, their irritation at government and at me. I'm the leader of the government. I think to be absolutely clear, in the last few months, people in Tiverton, people in Wakefield just heard far too much about stuff they didn't want to be hearing about, and not enough about what we want to do to take the country forward.
Meanwhile, Labour's Shadow Secretary of State for Defence, John Healey, told GB News the public want Mr Johnson to go.
I'd spent a lot of time campaigning in Wakefield, very struck by the level of disgust and discontent as people, I think, have seen through Boris Johnson and have lost confidence in the Conservatives doing the basic job of government now. And so it's our job in opposition until the next election to try and hold them to account and offer some of the plans that would make a difference, including on the cost of living, that we're just not seeing from the government itself.
The Rmt Union is refusing to rule out further strike action as a third day of walkouts disrupts transport across the country. Only a fifth of train services are running today as thousands of rail workers protest over jobs, pay and conditions. Many seaside resorts have no services at all and disruption is expected to continue into Sunday. RMT boss Mick Lynch says rail workers would get a better deal if the government actually understood the work they do.
We're not going to name dates immediately. And we're going to continue working constructively with the companies to try and get a deal. But that is a really steep challenge at the moment. And it hurts our people because they've lost their wages. We don't want that to happen. So if Grant Shapps wants to be constructive, that's what he can do. It's up to him what his disposition is. I'll work with Grant Shapps or anyone else that's got something constructive to say in this dispute.
A shooting at a nightclub in Norway's capital is being investigated as an act of terrorism. 2 people are dead and 14 seriously injured in the incident in Oslo. Police say one suspect, a 42-year-old Norwegian citizen of Iranian origin, is in custody. He was arrested with 2 weapons, one of which was fully automatic. The shooting took place just hours before Oslo was due to hold its annual Pride Parade. That's now been cancelled. Local militia say Ukrainian forces in Severodonetsk have been ordered to withdraw from the eastern city. The retreat would leave most of Luhansk under Russian control. Earlier today, Boris Johnson said the economic consequences of Russia's war could force Ukraine to agree a peace deal that's not in its interests. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have marked Armed Forces Day by paying tribute to men and women, past and present, who have served both here in the UK and around the world. Kensington Palace marked the occasion by releasing 5 new images taken in November last year when Kate visited Purbright Training Academy. Earlier, the HMS Prince of Wales returned to Portsmouth Naval Base after completing NATO exercises off the Spanish coast. The Royal Navy aircraft carrier was the command ship for the drills. And Sir Paul McCartney will make history later when he becomes Glastonbury Festival's oldest ever solo headliner. The former Beatle will take to the stage exactly 1 week after celebrating his 80th birthday. His set is expected to attract an especially large crowd with hits from throughout his very long career. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Angela.
Thanks, Ray. Well, we're getting back to our top story again now. Rail workers striking today for the 3rd time this week. As the General Secretary of the Rmt Union said, there is a long way to go before the industrial dispute is settled. Mick Lynch threatened future strikes if train operators do not meet his union's demands for better pay and job security. 40,000 rail workers reportedly have walked out today as only a fifth of services run and half of all lines have been closed. The Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, has said the industrial action is hurting the very people that the unions claim to stand up for? Well, talks between the RMT and rail employers are expected to continue into the coming week. But what has gone wrong between employers and unions that has brought us to this point? And what can we do to avoid this kind of disruption in the future? Well, I still have Patrick in the studio here with me, but I'm also now joined by Debbie Sanders, who has over 30 years of industrial relations experience in a whole range of industries. Her company, Make Work Better, helps organisations to build positive relationships with unions, often after disputes or breakdowns in relationships. Welcome to you, Debbie. Thank you for joining us here on the programme. Look, I mean, you cannot get through a day at the moment without the word strike or industrial relations coming into the conversation in some way. What has actually happened to the industrial relations between employers and workers that has got us to this situation?
Yeah, I think, I mean, conflict is part and parcel of working life all the time. You know, different parties in the employment relationship have different perspectives on problems, on challenges, on workplace change. I mean, disputes are still relatively rare. They're going up, of course, as we're seeing, but they are going up from a low base. I mean, there's always opportunities. These strikes don't just occur, as we all know. There's lots of opportunities to resolve things leading up to a strike. In fact, a lot of people say that strikes are often, you know, the occasion and not the cause. So there's a number of different factors which can cause people to walk out, if you like, or to organise a dispute. It's really costly for all parties, so nobody sort of takes this lightly. You know, employers and the trade unions and the workers who vote to take action. What we tried to do is encourage employers to build a positive employee relations climate. So when an inevitable disagreement arises, you're in a better position with which to withstand that disagreement and conflict and mitigate risk. I mean, I think it's really interesting that employee relations or industrial relations is often a top risk in an organisation. But it doesn't get a lot of investment. So, you know, it requires constant investment. It's like a marriage, if you like. Employee relations, we often talk about being like a marriage. You need to keep talking. You don't wait until things go wrong before you invest in it. If you do that, if you wait until everything's gone wrong, a lot of people say, and this has certainly been my experience, that it can take 3, 4, 5 years to rebuild trust and rebuild relationships. So that, you know, what we try to promote is more understanding of different perspectives, better understanding of what unions do, what unions are, and that's been lost, I think. You know, I'll just give you a little example. So when I was at university, we studied industrial relations. When I did my CIPD, my personnel and development qualifications, we studied industrial relations. That doesn't happen anymore. So
let me just then, I mean, because I've looked at the sort of work that you do, and I was fascinated. What you say is that you use common sense, clarity and straightforwardness. You have passion and energy guided by positive values and inclusion and diversity. Well, I mean, they're wonderful words to use, but what do you do and how do you actually use them, as in the case, say, of the rail strike at the moment, where both sides have dug their heels in and cannot seem to make a compromise?
Yeah, I mean, I think what happens in industrial relations particularly is a focus on sort of win and lose. We don't have what we try to do, and I have done, you know, successfully in some organisations. It doesn't always work. Is try to encourage or develop skills of problem solving. Now that's really different to negotiating. There are always areas, they might be small to begin with, but small areas that you can collaborate on as teams of union reps, teams of managers. Problem-solving skills requires more patience, it requires more creativity, it requires a lot of listening, and it requires you to understand other people's positions, but not dig your heels into your own position.
I've still got Patrick Flynn in the studio with me. Patrick, do you think any of those words were ever used by, say, Margaret Thatcher when she was dealing with the unions?
Well, I mean, no, Margaret Thatcher would have approached a looming industrial dispute as she would have approached a war, basically, and got her ducks in a row. We think back to the miners' strike and making sure the stocks of coal were at an all-time high so that the terrain was in her favour. I personally think the rail industry is still quite polarised between managements and a very hardball few trade unions, notably the RMT. And I think the dispute will eventually be settled with some kind of productivity-related element to whatever pay deal comes about. Where I agree with Debbie is in those actual advanced negotiations that we will get to at some stage, a bit of creativity about, well, you're asking for this on pay, but, you know, this, as you were saying earlier, Spanish practice on productivity about who can move from depot A to depot B 200 yards away. You give us something on that, we might be able to bump another 0.5%. That's the sort of thing that I think Mick Lynch will ultimately be prepared to talk about. But he's a strike and settling a strike is really, it's just another business deal.
Yeah.
A hardball deal, they have to agree the price and they have to agree the arrangements around that.
I have to say, I take my hat off to Mick Flynn, because he has used an entirely new approach to dealing with the press, hasn't he? He's not a sort of tub-thumping, and he doesn't shout, and he doesn't get over-emotional. He's very calm, very reasoned and reasonable when he's talking, and he's actually turned the tables on a lot of my colleagues by being quite rude to them, hasn't he? I mean, is this a strategy that you think is ensuring that he's getting the public on his side and seeing that their argument is a very reasonable one?
Well, he certainly, I think he's performed well this week, whatever you think of his wider politics. And he's not allowed his media interviewers to define the situation, and he's punched back. And any who haven't been as well briefed as they might be have come to rue the day on that one. And I think the one key objective for the RMT during this week was to keep the member morale up, so they're at least willing to contemplate another set of strikes, which for the passengers is pretty gloomy news. But I think probably Mick Lynch has succeeded in keeping the morale up during these strikes, and therefore there will be a big appetite for a solid turnout for the next set of strikes at the end of July.
Yes, I wonder, Debbie, if you've got any thoughts at all on Mick Lynch's approach to dealing publicly with questions about the strikes.
I suspected that you might ask me that. Yeah, I mean, I think he's handling it as I would have expected. You know, he's very articulate. He believes in what he's saying, and he feels he's got a good case, and he's coming across, you know, very well. I was listening to him earlier on talking about, you know, collaboration and problem solving, just not using those terms.
Yeah.
Which I think is what your correspondent is saying as well.
Yeah. I mean, at what point do you get involved in trying to negotiate an agreement when there's a strike? And indeed, would you welcome the opportunity of being asked to intervene in this particular strike between the RMT and the employers?
Well, where I've got involved before is another big dispute quite a while ago now in aviation. And our role was to come in after the dispute and try and rebuild the relationship back up. And as I said, I mean, that took a 4 or 5 year programme of work because we were looking at, you know, the capability, the behaviours, the structures. We were looking at communication. We were looking at the problems that needed to be solved and building skills in solving those problems. So these aren't small bits of work, and it isn't also... it has to be, I'm not just saying this, but it has to be designed based on the context, the people, what's happened, and that industry and that relationship. Again, another example from aviation wasn't a dispute, but it was very nearly a dispute where relationships had got very, very difficult. And what you're talking about here, if you don't rebuild these relationships, you will never, as an organisation, be able to manage change. I mean, that's what employee relations, industrial relations is about. It's about good change management, but it's doing it with people from different perspectives.
But let me put this to you then in a hypothetical situation. Supposing I was to have you here in the studio and we had Mick Lynch sitting there and we had Andy Bagnall, who is the chief exec of the Rail Partners here. What would you say to both of them to ensure that perhaps they can find common ground somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, I mean, I think, somebody like me can't make people do anything. They have to agree that there is where is that collaboration space, if you like, that they can start to work on. I've no doubt that they'll get an agreement on this particular dispute. But I am not an expert in the rail industry at all. But I suspect that there are other problems that will need to be resolved in the way that they currently do business with each other, because if it isn't going to be any different to anywhere else I've seen. So there will be other things, key relationships will need to be rebuilt. Other problems are going to come up, or challenges for the business, and they're going to want their union reps to, buy into those changes. So I think they need to, once this is resolved, they need to start looking at how do they use a different approach. How do they build, trust? How do they build capability so that they can adopt a slightly different approach to solving problems in the future? Because this is the episode they've got on now, isn't it? It's not going to go away.
No. I'm wondering, Patrick, if you think that is something that would work with all of the strikes that we are possibly facing in this coming year, because, it's what we were talking about before. We've got so many industries now, BA, of course, perhaps being the first one that's going to start to affect us, but all of those other industries going back into the autumn, local government, teachers, the NHS. Do you think that what we've just heard Debbie talking about is actually something that would work, or are we in such a political straitjacket at the moment, with so many unions actually in defiance of the government, that actually it is not going to work, and it's going to take something even more radical than that to sort them out?
Well, I think we are in quite a polarised situation. I also think with the cause or the objective of these disputes being quite heavily focused about pay, and when inflation is 8, 9, 10%, there's no getting away from it. There's a struggle here. The government says we can't have general pay settlements of 8, 9 or 10%.
Because it will push inflation even higher.
It will extend high inflation, and it will make everybody think this time next year that inflation is going to carry on being like that, and then we'll be locked into high inflation, and that makes squeezing it out economically much more costly. So the government is saying workers are going to have to take a living standards hit, like it or lump it, basically, and trade unions are never going to like it, and the ones who've got heavily unionised sectors and members who are quite militant, they will think they've got a better chance of busting it. And the rail industry is a prime example of that. But actually, in the modern era, the core public sector is the most unionised part of the economy by far. And we're looking at problems in schools and hospitals. And those are two sectors, obviously, where people have had a very rough time, not just those working in it, but those who use it. And the idea that our children could miss out on more education after what they went through in the pandemic, I think a lot of people, a lot of parents will feel really aggrieved about that. And that's the kind of hot one to watch in September.
Well, interestingly, that's one of the things I'm going to be talking about with one of my guests towards the end of the programme today. But in the meantime, Patrick, thank you very much indeed. And Debbie, thank you also. Debbie Sanders, industrial relations expert, for your take on how we might get out of some of the problems that we've got at the moment. Debbie, who is the founder of her own company that just deals precisely with settling industrial relations. Thank you both very much indeed. Plenty more to come this afternoon on Alastair Stewart and Friends with me, Angela Rippon. And after the break, that means there's going to be a big concert in Hyde Park tonight. But will the rail strike scupper the enjoyment of the fans in actually getting to see their favourite band? who are, of course, the Rolling Stones. But first, let's take a look at the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK will be unsettled as low pressure continues to dominate the weather pattern for many of us. Let's get you the details. A breezy afternoon to come across southwest England. There'll be a mixture of sunny spells and scattered heavy showers, feeling cooler than recent days with highs of 16 Celsius. Plenty of sunny spells expected across southeast England and the London area. A few showers are possible, perhaps the odd heavy one developing too. Blustery conditions are expected across Wales with some heavy showers moving through. Gusts of 30 to 35 miles per hour are also possible towards the coast. Sunny spells and showers for northwest England. Some of the showers will be on the heavy side but will move through quickly on the brisk wind. Highs of 19 Celsius, so feeling rather fresher. Further showers are likely across northeast England through Saturday afternoon, though they won't be as heavy as they were on Friday. Spells of sunshine will lift temperatures to around 20 Celsius. Plenty of sunny spells across Scotland, but also the risk of some showers. Winds will continue to increase across western parts of the country, highs reaching around 18 or 19 Celsius. An unseasonably windy afternoon for Northern Ireland with gales developing around the coasts. Sunshine and showers for many and feeling cool for this time of year, highs of 17. Staying unsettled into the evening for many with blustery showers most frequently across the west of the UK, and that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So Howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 26 minutes past 1 and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News. But just for this weekend only with me, Angela Rippon. Now, as a third day of rail strikes get underway, the hospitality and tourism sectors are expected to take yet another hit, with many people choosing to stay at home rather than be going out on the trains. Well, a Saturday in London would normally see thousands of tourists flocking to see Big Ben and the London Eye and the rest of it. But are they still going to be coming today? Well, our London reporter, Alice Porter, is right by Hyde Park now, ahead of a really big night for music because the Rolling Stones are going to be there. How are things with you already? Are the fans already arriving, Alice?
Hello there, good afternoon. Yes, the gates have just opened and there was a very steady stream of people who have all poured in to see the Rolling Stones, who will be performing later on today. Now, we are expecting 65,000 people in theory to come to the concert, but I think with the train strikes that could be very difficult because they're only operating at about 20% capacity, which is what we saw earlier on in the week. And I was just looking at some of the train times today, and the last train coming out of London is about sort of 5:30. Well, that's not much good to you if you've been rocking and rolling, seeing the Rolling Stones, because it's going to finish at about 10:30. So I think that's going to put a lot of people off, and unfortunately a lot of people, again, I was having a look online, have had to resell their tickets for a vastly reduced price for what they bought them for. So it's really, really difficult for a lot of people who just want to go and have a good afternoon seeing some of their favourite musicians perform.
But, I mean, it was a sellout, as I understand it. So are you saying, Alice, that if a few hopefuls turn up, they might actually get tickets to get in to see the Rolling Stones, not just be out in the park and listening to it on the loudspeakers?
It does say, I did have a look on the website, it does still say it is sold out, but I'm looking around, there's definitely a few people who are hoping to perhaps get a little bit of a freebie in the park and listen to the concert. And of course, this isn't the only concert that is taking place today in London. We've got Ed Sheeran up in Wembley, he was performing last night and today. We've got Billie Eilish, who's hot-footed it from Glastonbury. She's performing at the O2 this evening. So there's lots of people who want to go and see these musicians, but with the train strikes, I think it's going to be very difficult for people who don't live in London already. And of course, this is bad news, not just for the performers, not just bad news for people who want to go and see their favourite musicians, but this is bad news for the music industry. I mean, remember, we haven't had Glastonbury and other festivals for 2 years because of COVID. A lot of the music industry wants to get back on its feet, and of course, the smaller festivals as well. So I think the timing of this, we've got sort of peak time really in June when lots of people have had 2 years not seeing their favourite musicians. They want to go out, they want to go and see them, and they want to, I think, after COVID, go and support the music industry, but they really can't at the moment because of these train strikes.
No. Very briefly, I know that someone who will certainly be there this evening is Alastair Stewart, because he's a huge Rolling Stones fan. But I just wonder, I mean, what do you think is going to be the general age group of the people coming to see the Stones? I mean, they're not exactly in the first flush of youth anymore, any of them, are they? Are you going to see a lot of people coming with grey hairs?
I have to say, there has been the odd grey hair. I've been looking around. I've been in touch with Alistair, actually, and said to him, let him know, I said, we're here, and I've been trying to help him make sure he's on the right entrance and things like that. So I might touch base with him a little bit later on. But yes, I would say I'm slightly perhaps one of the younger people here. No offence meant to anybody who's here. Anyone who goes and is able to get a ticket and come to the concert, more importantly, deserves a medal, in my opinion.
Well, enjoy it, Alice, and I'm sure you'll have a front row seat, and give our love to Alistair as well. Thanks very much indeed. Alistair Porter there, our London reporter. Now, you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, and we've still got plenty more to come this afternoon. We've spoken in depth about the strikes that are going on at the moment, but how much impact are they going to have on our industries and our health? Well, we're going to be discussing that next. But first, let's bring you up to date with the very latest news headlines. Here's Ray.
Thanks, Angela. It's just after 1:30. I'm Ray Addison in the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister says voters want to hear less about what he's calling things he messed up as he defended his leadership after a double by-election defeat. Speaking from the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Rwanda this morning, Boris Johnson said the public actually wants to hear more about the big issues.
I have to, listen to all sorts of criticism. That's part of my job as leader. When things are tough, of course people are going to, rightly going to direct their frustration, their irritation at government and at me. I'm the leader of the government. I think, to be absolutely clear, in the last few months, people in Tiverton, people in Wakefield just heard far too much about stuff they didn't want to be hearing about, and not enough about what we want to do to take the country forward.
The Rmt Union is refusing to rule out further strike action this year as a third day of walkouts disrupts transport across the country. Only a fifth of train services are running today as thousands of rail workers protest over jobs, pay and conditions. RMT boss Mick Lynch says rail workers would get a better deal if the government understood the work they do. However, Transport Secretary Grant Shapps says that today the railway industry needs to move with the times. Police say the deadly shooting overnight in Norway could be an act of Islamist terrorism. 2 people died and 14 others were seriously hurt at a nightclub in Oslo. Officers say a 42-year-old Norwegian citizen of Iranian origin is in custody. The shooting happened just hours before the city's annual Pride Parade. That's now been cancelled. And the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have marked Armed Forces Day by paying tribute to men and women, past and present, who've served. Kensington Palace marked the occasion by releasing 5 new images taken last year when Kate visited Purbright Training Academy. Earlier, the HMS Prince of Wales returned to Portsmouth Naval Base after completing NATO exercises off the Spanish coast. We're on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Back to Angela Rippon in just a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
we're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 25 minutes to 2 and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends on GB News with me, Angela Rippon, just for this weekend. Now, the virus that leads to polio has been detected in London in a number of sewages across the city. Polio was eradicated in the UK back in 2003, but the UK Health Security Agency announced this week that it was possibly imported by someone who'd recently been vaccinated overseas, where a live form of polio was detected. Experts say that the risk is low, but we have invited a doctor onto the programme today to lay out all the facts for us. So welcome, Dr. Emeka. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
No problem.
As we say, polio has been eradicated in this country since 2002. I think, as I understand it, it's been found in one specific area northeast of London.
Yes.
How worried should we be about this, though?
I wouldn't say too worried at the moment. So they actually haven't found any cases. What they have found is detected samples in sewage in North East London, which they believe has been brought by somebody who's travelled overseas who had the live vaccine. So the way we get vaccinated in this country is we have the injectable dead version of the vaccine. However, they have the oral live vaccine in other parts of the country, so it could have been brought over. We actually haven't seen any cases. However, we do know that it affects a lot of children under the age of 5. So my colleagues and myself and A&E are then obviously keeping ourselves aware of children coming in with viral symptoms who may potentially have been affected by the polio virus.
Well, what are the symptoms?
So the symptoms are general viral symptoms, so fever, malaise, headache, fatigue, lethargy. And then
which could be actually mistaken for other things.
It could be mistaken for almost any virus.
Yeah.
Obviously, we know now with COVID virus, we know with monkeypox virus, any viral symptoms are similar to that. However, when it gets into the CNS, the central nervous system, this is when it gets quite serious because then it could cause what we call paralytic polio, which affects children, and that's when it gets very, very serious.
Yeah.
So that's something we're obviously looking out for in terms of detectable, because during the COVID times, especially children under 5, a lot of them haven't actually received the full vaccination.
Yes. I mean, I think the figures are, 100,000 children under 5 have not been fully vaccinated.
Yeah, we're urging parents to make sure they're checking their red books and making sure they're getting their children fully vaccinated if possible, because you should have at least 5 polio jabs in early childhood by the time you get to your teens. And that's one of the reasons we've seen the eradication here, because of our great vaccination program in the NHS. So it's really imperative that parents are making sure that children actually adhere to it.
And how will they do that? Because, I mean, a lot of them didn't get it because they weren't at school.
Exactly. So they should be contacting their GPs in the community to make sure that they're up to date with their jabs.
And they will have all their medical records.
Yes, they will have all their medical records, and they can get their boosters if they need to.
Good. Now, I'm of a generation that actually remembers polio before it was eradicated. I can remember as a little girl seeing, children come to school with calipers on their legs to, to keep them straight. I knew of families where a member of the family contracted polio to such an extent that they had to be put in what we call an iron lung. And as I understand it, there is still one man in Texas in America who has been in an iron lung since he was 7 years old, and he's now coming up to his 70s. But, we don't have that anymore. But do you think that perhaps we become complacent? Just remind us of how dangerous polio is.
It's a terrible virus, and myself, being Nigerian, I've come from a country where it's been endemic before, and we've suffered a lot with polio. You know, it's there in Pakistan and Afghanistan, and we believe that's how it may have come over. So what we're doing is we're encouraging everyone to make sure that our hygiene and hand washing is really, really at the forefront.
Something that you talk about in your book.
Yeah, something I talk about in my book.
In your hands. But I mean, I'll come to that in a second. But just, I mean, have we become complacent, do you think? I mean, how deadly can it be in a population?
We have to remember that diseases, they don't respect borders. So, obviously with travel and tourism now, disease can be brought in and taken out of any kind of country and brought from across the world. This is why we need to make sure that we're very fortunate in the NHS where we have a system where our hospitals are clean, we have clean running water. A lot of these countries where polio is endemic, such as Nigeria and in Asia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, a lot of the urgent care centres don't actually have clean running water, and so they can't practice hygiene at an efficient level to eradicate polio. That's why one of the reasons I've actually worked with Water Aid ahead of the G7 summit is to actually, urge the governments and the powers that be to kind of provide these countries with systems where they have cleanliness and clean hygiene, and then eradicate it in their own countries before kind of bringing it over here. I think that's really, really important.
So is the polio virus something that can be eradicated just by having a healthy form of living?
It's a fecal oral virus. It's an enterovirus. So if you keep your hands in your mouth very clean and you're washing regularly, you're way less likely to cause spread. You're more likely to limit spread that way. And then obviously if you're vaccinated on top of that, you'll have nothing to worry about. No. So between vaccination and obviously clean hygiene, just like how we've managed to vaccinate ourselves with COVID and obviously masks and space and washing our hands and gelling our hands, and we've seen obviously the reduction in the number of cases and mortality with COVID, it's the same as polio, and that's how we were able to eradicate it the first time. And if we continue, then obviously we shouldn't have many problems.
No, I mean, we've said we eradicated in this country back in 2003. But I mean, you've touched on it already, the fact that we're all able to move around the world in the way that we can.
One of the things,
there are many places in the world where polio is still endemic.
Exactly, and you're not always symptomatic with polio, so you could be carrying and spreading the virus without even knowing it, just by going from country to country. That's why it's really important whenever you go into the toilet, whenever you're eating, you are making sure that you're washing your hands thoroughly every time. As in, for me, it's kind of second nature with my job. I'm just used to it all the time, gelling and washing my hands. But a lot of people aren't. No. A lot of people work in sectors and jobs where their hygiene isn't at the forefront and they're not used to it, and they're used to going to the toilet, maybe not washing their hands, maybe having a sandwich.
I know
it sounds gross,
I
but
cringe
it happens.
when I go
It
into a
happens.
public toilet and I see somebody walk out who hasn't washed their hands. But I mean, you
Just
cover
stroll
all of
out.
this in your book because
do.
you feel very strongly about this, don't
100%.
you? It's your health in your hands.
You're very right.
And even where polio is concerned, it's still in our hands to try and eradicate it.
So many conditions and diseases we have today, we can actually do something about at the forefront at home. And that's what this book is about. It's basically a little Bible, if you will, a little like booklet on how you can future-proof your health by doing many simple little changes which can eventually help you, one, acutely at the forefront like now in terms of virus, and then loads along the line of chronic disease down the line. So that's why I'm encouraging people to read it, because a lot of people actually like, oh, I didn't actually know this. I didn't know I could do that for my own health. And you'd be surprised how many patients I see coming into A&E who, if they had this kind of knowledge back in the day, probably wouldn't be seeing me to this day. And they're like, oh, doc, I wish I knew now what I did when I was a kid. And I'm like, yeah, it's not too late. You can still take your health into your hands.
We can take responsibility for our health ourselves.
Responsibility is important.
Doctor, thank you very much indeed for
you.
coming in and joining us. And I hope that what you've done is given a lot of parents, taken a lot of the stress and the anxiety away from a lot of parents who may have been worried by those headlines.
Just to be vigilant, make sure their children are vaccinated and make sure their children are washing their hands.
Thank you very much indeed. Good advice there from Dr. Emeka. Oh, I'm not even going to try and pronounce your surname. What is it, Dr. Emeka?
Okorocha.
Okorocha. Thank you very much indeed. And he's the author of that new book, Your Health in Your Hands. Now, we've been speaking about the third day of rail strikes in depth today. The industrial action is estimated to cost the rail industry up to £150 million in lost revenue and cancelled upgrade work. Businesses and the retail and hospitality sectors will also be severely impacted, according to experts, causing a further hit on the economy. Now, the Centre for Economics and Business Research Consultancy has estimated that the strike is going to cost £91 million, as thousands of people are unable to work. Richard Burge, who's the chief executive of the London Chamber of Commerce and Industry, has also warned that London cannot afford a summer of chaos on the railways and tube lines. There is an argument that the strikes indeed have not been quite as effective as they might have been, say, 5 or 10 years ago, simply because so many people are able to work from home. But this does not apply to our hospitality industry. You can't have the restaurant in your house, can you? Which is why so many of those industries have really taken a battering. So joining me now is Michael Kill. He's the CEO of the Nighttime Industries Association. And Michael, I mean, just give me some idea of, first of all, what it is that your industry covers. Because when we talk about the nighttime industries, some people might think that that's, you know, quite a sort of a narrow group of businesses. But how wide are the areas that you cover?
Well, it's extremely wide. I mean, from theatres, pubs, bars, restaurants, nightclubs, venues, arenas, anyone that operates really between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. in the morning. So that's the breadth of it. But yeah, there's a huge amount of businesses, a huge amount of supply chain, and as you can imagine, a huge workforce that work at night. 1.94 million people pre-COVID estimated work just during that period.
Now, you have been quoted as saying that you had 40% trade was lost during the pandemic. You were absolutely clobbered with losses of £500 million. You've had strikes leading to irreparable loss of businesses and jobs, especially after you've done so much to repair the recovery from the pandemic. Just give me an example of some of the things where you'd say an industry has been clobbered. What sort of things have been happening, and are they likely to recover?
Well, we've lost about a third of nightclubs across the country, but as you can appreciate, over the last week with the strikes, we've seen a lot of people go back into the lockdown pandemic routine, which is working from home. And as you can appreciate, things like lunchtime, meetings, etc., which are the mainstay of pubs and restaurants within our cities, have been hit very hard because many people have gone back to working at home. And as we've moved throughout this week, we found it extremely challenging. It's at a point where we're at the start of the summer festival season and the event season. So we've heard much about Glastonbury and people leaving almost 2 days early to get down to the event for 210,000 people over this weekend and this week. But it's hugely challenging and hugely worrying hearing this weekend that we are going to see pre-pandemic business levels or pandemic business levels, particularly during the lockdown, which is a concern. And we're already hearing a 30-40% prospective drop-off.
Your heart must sink in your boots when you hear of all the other potential strikes that are in the pipeline. Are we going to be losing whole sections of your sector of industry who will perhaps never recover from this? Is it going to be that drastic?
Well, we're already seeing, I mean, cost inflation has already taken many businesses and many jobs. So it's almost a perfect storm. As you can appreciate, people have got less disposable income. Cost inflation is squeezing the margins of many of these businesses. And then we've also got things like strikes that are have affected this week, and we don't know how long that's going to go on for. So we've got some huge challenges ahead. We've managed to get some momentum, but we are still very fragile at a critical point of recovery. Bearing in mind, as suggested, we're at the point of the summer festival season, which is vitally important this year, but also at the point that we're moving into tourist season more than anything. So we're starting to get visitors, and if the infrastructure is not in place, there's a huge concern. But more importantly, it's about getting our customers and our staff home safely. As you can imagine, if everything stops at 6:30 in the evening, it becomes very difficult and very concerning. And there are contingency planning that needs to be put in place to ensure that people can get to and from their workplace.
But who's going to pay for that? Who's going to provide it? I mean, I think they've already laid on all sorts of buses and things to get people home from the Commonwealth Games, for instance, if they're affected by strikes later in July. Presumably, your industry itself cannot bear the cost of that.
Well, it's exactly the issue. It's, you know, we can't keep on incurring cost. And, you know, as you can understand, there are a mixed response. Some people who sympathise with the rail workers, others that are frustrated. But as you can appreciate, millions of people are in a similar situation. They've had to be very patient as we start to recover. But we would have appreciated this to be resolved at the table with negotiations rather than strike action, because what's actually happened is you're impacted on industries that have been really at the sharpest end of the pandemic and now at the sharpest end of cost inflation and in a very precarious position. So it's hugely worrying for the future. We're working hard to create contingencies. People can still come to us. We're still open. But as you can understand, we need them to ensure that they plan for getting to us and from home and make sure that they can do it safely. And in terms of staff, there's a huge worry that there's an additional cost there that we need to foot to ensure that these people can get in and out of work and they can get home safe, particularly in the early hours of the morning.
Can I just ask you very briefly whether or not you also fear that rise in the cost of living is also going to make people wonder whether or not they can actually afford to have as many meals out and as much entertainment out in the evening?
Well, we already have seen in many respects people's choices in terms of frequency of visit, dwell times. You know, as you can understand, with prices going up, cost inflation driving prices up, we have had to take account of that. But there are market restrictions as well. There's only so far you can go. There was a recent article suggesting that the price of a pint went up to £8 in the city in London, which was very difficult to hear. So for us, we do need some robust action from government to stem this situation, which without a doubt will have an impact on everybody. But at the moment, as an industry, we're still very fragile. We're working hard to maintain our recovery position, but it's becoming harder and harder. So we need to lean on the government to give us some opportunity to get out of this situation, particularly around the strike action if it continues.
Well, I think we need Richie Sunak to tell us where the money tree is in the garden at number 11 Downing Street, don't we? Michael Krill, thank you very much indeed. He's the CEO of the Nighttime Industries Association. Now, joining me now is health psychologist Lucy Beresford. And Lucy, we've asked you to join us because I think, you know, we're hearing so much of the effect that the strikes are having on people's jobs and on politics indeed. But what about the effect that strikes and the after effects of strikes are having on people's psychological health and indeed their stress levels?
Well, I'm a psychotherapist, and what I've noticed is a huge uptick in stress and anxiety, partly because we actually had 2 very difficult years where people really had to reappraise their lives, the way in which they worked, And eventually we felt that we got a handle on how to function during a pandemic. And then suddenly we've had to reappraise some of those decisions all over again. Quite a lot of the stress and anxiety is around uncertainty, whether that's uncertainty around your own personal income or whether it's around uncertainty as to whether you're going to get away on holiday. That actually stress is often around the unknown. And the more unknowns that there are in your life, the more anxiety that can be triggered.
So how do you suggest to people that they cope with that? I mean, people turning up at the airports, we've seen them getting absolutely furious because at the last minute their flight has been cancelled, or finding that they're having to stand in a queue for hours on end, and then difficulties with their luggage when they get to the other end. People are going to get very angry. Their blood pressure's going to go up. What can you say to them that says, actually, in those situations, you should stay a bit calm and think about your own psychological health?
Well, it's always important to try and work out what you can be in control of, particularly when a scenario presents itself where you're out of control. So it's always around focusing on what you can be in control of, which would be your timings, your breathing, whether you've got enough food and water. And I suppose one of the advantages of having a strike that is flagged up is that at least you can prepare, whereas sometimes stressful events take us by surprise and are doubly anxiety provoking because we haven't prepared for them. So in this case, it would be very much around suggesting, actually, I may have some disruption to my travel. And if I know that in advance, then I can take some executive action around what I take with me, whether I take lots of extra material so that I can entertain the children, or am I going to need to pack things in my hand luggage so that I've got access to them, which would normally be in my check-in luggage. All these little tricks where you can stay in control of a certain amount of your life because there are other elements of your life that are completely out of your control.
And I think we're going to have an awful lot of that this year. So that is very, very useful advice. Thank you very much indeed for letting us have that, Lucy. That's psychotherapist Lucy Beresford. Now, let's get to your thoughts on our main discussions today, the rail strike. I've got an email here from Jonathan who says, this is the first time Network Rail has been on strike since 1994, since it was rail track. The signalling grades are out because the proposal is insanely dangerous. If there is no maintenance on hand to fix faults, signallers will have to manage faults which are safety critical for 12 hours, and this is deadly. Anne says, rail strike? Can't recall the last time I got on a train. It must be about 20 years ago. Too expensive and no station near me. Then we've got Jay saying it depends on what they're striking about. Mick Lynch is not doing rail workers any favours for veering off the points and making it anti-government speech. Derek, when the government wanted a pay rise, they just helped themselves to our money. Yet who has worked hard to pay their inflated salaries are not afforded such luxuries. Peter, public sector workers, in my own experience, are the laziest ever. Oh, you're on dangerous ground there, Peter. That's not my job, seems to be the norm. Making tea, coffee more than most, taking 4 hours to each other. Talking for each hours to each other, and woeful management. Having worked in private and public sectors, I have experienced all of this firsthand. And finally, Glyn says, public sector workers already get paid more than private sector workers for similar jobs. I hope that all the strikers lose their jobs. Personally, I never missed a single day during COVID while my tax money was paying for public sector workers to sit at home. I don't think that applies to all of them. But Sophie says, of course the public are going to go mad. Trains out, teachers may be out, and so it'll go on. But the buck lies with our government spending millions unnecessarily and lying to the public. It's no wonder the working class have had enough. Strike if you have to. It is the only way to be heard. Jim says, Mick Lynch is earning £125,000, whereas I'm earning £9.18 an hour, working 40 hours a week. I can't afford to join a union. Unions are not interested in representing us. Ian, have we got room for Ian? Yes, we have. The disputes were inevitable. The Tories have had 12 years of austerity, keeping wages down, but allowing their friends to have major increases in earnings. And we've got another one here from Bob, who says, where is the list of working practices that forms the basis of change for modernisation of the railways and to consequential redundancies that may ensue? Well, you've all obviously thought very much about what we've been talking about today, and clearly diverse attitudes to many of the things that are going on today. But that's what we're here for, isn't it, here on GB News? We do want to hear what you think about the stories, and we love it when you don't all agree with each other. That's public opinion, isn't it? But I'm afraid that is all we have got time for today. I will be back tomorrow at 12 o'clock, but enjoy the rest of your day. And I know that Alastair Stewart, for whom I'm sitting in, is certainly going to be enjoying his day, because he's going to be listening to the Rolling Stones this evening. And I'm sure he and everybody else will be enjoying that concert. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day too. I will see you tomorrow. Until then, stay safe and well, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK will be unsettled as low pressure continues to dominate the weather pattern for many of us. Let's get you the details. A breezy afternoon to come across southwest England. There'll be a mixture of sunny spells and scattered heavy showers, feeling cooler than recent days with highs of 16 Celsius. Plenty of sunny spells expected across southeast England, and the